Welcome to Podsauce. Now, I am excited about our next guest because they host a podcast that kind of gives me the whole Jack Ryan, Jason Bourne feel. I do have questions.
Oh, I got a lot of questions.
Some of these stories are so out there that I want to be like, girl.
Well, not only that, there's not like, we've been talking about this podcast nonstop since we came in today because we listened to it and we've been debating. There's parts of this podcast that pique both of our interests, so I'm really excited to have Sam Walker on, who is the host of American Vigilante, which is the podcast we were talking about. And American Vigilante is also a podcast from the UK-based Crowd Network. And this is exciting because we're getting someone from across the pond on.
Well, actually, she's in Arizona now.
Well, right now, but
Sam's down the street.
But the accent says UK.
1000%. Welcome, guys, to Podsauce. Sam Walker. Hi, Sam.
Hi, both of you. Hi, Alesha. Hi, Dax. Yes, can you tell that I'm not a Phoenician native, as you can tell from my accent?
Just
the locals realize I'm not one of their kind quite yet.
So let's get into your podcast. And to sum it up, your podcast, American Vigilante, is about a man who has traveled the world, saving children who have been kidnapped, basically righting the wrongs of people, and now he is telling his story on your podcast, detailing all these different events in his life and putting it out there for the world to listen to. Is that a good sum up of your podcast?
It is, and hearing the both of you in your introduction saying, hang on, I got questions, all I will say is, welcome to my world. This has been the last sort of 6 months of my life. I was introduced to a man who I know only as KC. I don't know his real name. I don't know where he lives. I know very little about his background apart from the bits he has told me. There's been a few off the record bits, but generally everything you hear on the podcast is what I know. And this is a man who has said, I want to tell my story. I've been living life on the edges of the law, outside of the law, however you may want to view that, I think is again a personal decision. But I want the world now to know what I have done and what people like me are doing in America today. And we talked for 50 plus hours last year. And I still lie awake at night thinking about it quite a lot of the time.
Sam, when you conducted your interviews with KC, did you do these in person or were they virtual? Were you able to look at him? And I'm asking this because when he's telling these stories, if you did them in person or even, virtual, how we're conducting this interview right now, were you able to look into his eyes and see if the man was telling you the truth? Did you get like a vibe? As a journalist, I'm sure you can get a good vibe, good sense of when someone is speaking truth or if there's a little sauce being added to the story.
And again, there's the $6 million question, but from the kind of factual point of view, I have never met this man.
Okay.
I haven't met him. I don't know where he lives. He's somewhere in the United States. The first time I was introduced to him, he was sitting in a car, in like a huge truck, with some headphones on that somebody had sent him because they said that's how you talk to somebody virtually. I mean, he was not tech savvy at all. And he was in shadow and I could see the outline of this enormous man. Now, I don't know if either of you are fans of the Disney classic Moana, one of my favorite movies. I've got 2 girls. I've watched the film approximately 900 times, and I don't care because I love it. But there's a character in that who's a demigod, voiced by Dwayne Johnson, and he's called Maui. And he's this enormous man with sort of a huge shock of black curly hair. And the first time I saw the outline of KC, I was like, holy moly, it's Maui. And that is the nickname I have given him, and he's in my phone as Maui. Because that's how I've seen him. I have talked to him, as I said, for more than 50 hours. We've talked very intensely. At times he wouldn't be on camera. At other times he was on camera for me if there was just me talking to him. He's intensely private. He wouldn't want his face to be recorded.
So you did see some parts of him in part, like you were able to visually look at him.
I have been able to look at him on screen. Yeah, not to begin with. I had to earn his trust.
Okay.
So here's the deal, Sam. I listened to numerous episodes.
Not scratching your neck like, so Sam.
I went back and forth with deciding whether or not this guy is a con artist of sorts and just making up these elaborate stories, because he would go on and on where I'm like, no, he's just he's watched a lot of Jason Bourne movies, Jack Bauer storylines, and like the things he would say about burner phones and, you know, your phones are going to be tracked. I'm like, yeah, but that's in every movie. And then his stories were so detailed that I'm like, this guy is telling the truth. I was conflicted the entire time listening to your podcast whether or not this guy is full of it.
I say it again. Welcome to my
Yeah, I
world.
was like, she said the same thing during the podcast.
But
However,
I think that's what someone needs to know going in is that is half the battle of like listening to this podcast, because you're like, no, like he's full of it. And then the next second you're like, no, this is legit.
I wanted to say that that's exactly the journey I wanted to take the listener on. I think, you know, podcasting is such a great medium because it's so authentic, right? And it's that little voice, you know, when we listen to a podcast, we're going for a run, we're walking our dogs, we're cooking dinner, we're in the bath, wherever you might listen. It's a really personal experience. And so you can't fake it. And so I wanted to take the listener on the same journey that I went on of going, is this guy for real? It's not my job to say, hey, this is what I believe and you must believe the same. I felt my job in this was the audience is to say, look, I'm going to tell you what this guy has told me. I'm going to ask all the questions I can ask, hopefully all the questions you've thought of asking, but you've got to make your own mind up. And Dax, you know, it's very interesting what you said about him being such a great storyteller. And the thing I asked myself time and time again was, if he wasn't such a great storyteller, would we believe him more? Is it the fact?
I kind of almost think so.
I think so. Yeah, but I definitely think so. And I think, you know, too, Sam, you have to take a lot of the credit in the way you effortlessly weaved. You played both navigator and listener. I mean, phenomenally, right? Like the way you created the atmosphere of, you know, this happened and this happened. I don't know if I believe that.
That was the best part, because at the moment where I was like, this guy is full of it, you stopped the recording and you jumped in and said, I don't know if I believe him. And I was like, okay, thank you. I'm glad Sam is on the same page as me right now.
Yeah, because I listened to episode 5, the Knock Knock episode. And this is what I came in with when I said, well, he refers to it as the Mexican mafia. I've never heard of it as the Mexican mafia. It's the cartel. We all know it's a cartel. So just elements of that and him saying, you know, he didn't want to go into this space. For those of you guys who haven't listened to this particular episode, he was to basically drive out a competing Mexican gang. I'll just...
Mafia?
That, them two, out of this area because there was a school, right? And so he talks about them having to go into this space, guns a-blazing, but he didn't want to wear a jacket. What's
like
this damn
bulletproof vest?
Bulletproof vest? Yeah. I'm like this. I'm over here doing this voguing, trying to figure out what this. But he goes into. He's like, because it's going to get in my way. But he also then, in my mind, I'm like, well, if the goal is to come out alive, because you have a family also, why wouldn't you put the jacket on? But before I could like see lies. He goes into why, you know, he doesn't want to wear it, because if it's this type of bullet or that type of gun that they're going to be using, basically all that will be null and void anyways, you know. So I like that Sam put plenty of pauses just within that particular episode to give the listener the liberty to question what they were listening to, but also provide further context as to this could be true though.
And I think it's a really good point that there, Alesha, you said, oh, and then he went into loads of details about bullets. And you know what? There is so much I didn't put into the podcast because it's quite boring. And he goes into so many details about the type of tire he puts on his truck and how he's kind of changed the engine capacity so that he can put more fuel in, so he can do this, and then how he's, and I'm like, oh.
Okay, Sam, 50 hours of conversation. What is your thoughts? Is it real or is it fake?
You got to listen to the podcast. I mean, if you want me to tell you the ending, are you the guy, Dax? Are you the guy who turns to the last 5 pages of the book when you start it? You are, aren't you?
Give me the Cliff Notes version. How did you meet him, by the way, Sam? How'd you meet Casey?
I was introduced to Casey by a third party. When I first arrived in Arizona,
she had landlord
issues. Really very bad experience with somebody who threatened our family, and it was a really frightening time. And a friend of a friend said to me, hey, I heard what happened to you and what this guy did to you. And it was, you know, if you want, say the word and someone could take him out into the desert. And I'm like, where have I moved to? I lived in this little sleepy. I was like, what's happening? And so I knew that there was people who knew people who would, could do things if you wanted them to be done. I will say for the record, I did not take him up on that offer. Beware if you're renting a house in Arizona. I'll give you his name. Yeah, don't rent from him.
Because he's 6 feet under in the desert.
Right, like, is he still alive, Sam? This landlord. I was like, let me find out Sam is about that life, because she broke that down in episode 1.
Do you know what? If only I'd known Casey before this, I don't think I would have had half the issues. But that's another story.
Spectacular.
But this made me think. Oh, hang on. So when someone else, this has nothing to do with Casey, but I was approached by someone else who said, look, I know somebody through someone else. He's willing to tell a story. I know you're a journalist. You're at the BBC for 20 years. You're now in Arizona. He would be willing perhaps to talk to you. Would you be willing to talk to him? So that is how it began. So the person who referred me to him was nothing to do with the issues that I had, but I suppose it gave some level of veracity to start with, because I didn't think, what? Of course these people don't exist. I'm from Britain. What are you talking about? It made me go, because it's funny, because I've got a lot of American friends who are like, oh yeah, of course guys like him are out there. And yet people in England are like, what? Is this the Wild West? And I'm like, yes.
Yes.
So, that's what's been very different as well. And people's responses to it are pretty much down the middle of, he's an American hero. I love him. I wish he was my friend. I'm glad he's out there. To people, and they are always men, sorry Dax, but sending me detailed series of tweets about why I'm an idiot and why I can't believe a word he said because they know someone who's in the military and it never would have happened like that, and all this sort of thing. So it's been triggering, I think, for a lot of people.
One of the things that kind of gave me just a little bit of pause is he was like, the main thing that they're in business to do is to get back kids. I mean, obviously there have been other cases, and you guys have to listen to the podcast where they've had to go in and acquire different, he calls them assets, so I'll just use that term to be on par with his language. But he was like, we'll do whatever it is that we have to do to accomplish our mission. If that means we have to kill them, if we've had to kill them or kill their families. I'm like, wait, how can you be open to killing a family and you're trying to get kids back? So just when he would say things like that, language like that, just because it seemed completely contradictory to what it felt like his stance was.
Oh, well, I would say, I think Casey talked about when I said to him, what if anyone ever came for your family? And he was like, I'd kill them, I'd kill their families, I'd eat their dog, I think he said, is what I remembered. He is absolutely at pains to say he has never, ever, ever laid a finger on anybody who he didn't know had hurt somebody else. That is, he says, his moral code. He said that he would never enter anybody's house and let, someone said, oh, I think Alesha's done something terrible and she lives over there. He wouldn't storm into your home unless he saw evidence for himself that you were in fact
a dirty bird,
harboring a child, or a dirty bird. But so he said to me, the one place we can feel safe is in our own backyard. He said, it is super important that I would never, ever, ever go into anybody's home if I wasn't absolutely sure that they were hurting a child, keeping a child captive, whatever it might be. And he said, we all need to be able to feel safe in our homes. And he said, but my backyard, I want people to feel safe in their backyard, and my backyard runs from coast to coast.
Yeah.
That's how he views
I think
it.
I agree with that, because I didn't hear anything so far within the podcast that contradicts that, because he was saying how he only went in under extreme duress to go get the kids. It's the episode with the children that he had to get out because he saw two playing, but he wasn't sure where the third one was. But because of the time, he was like, I just had to go on and get the two kids.
So Sam, with your podcast, obviously it's become super successful. It's in the top 100 on the UK charts for true crime. How often are you now getting hit up by people asking you to connect them to Casey because they have their own problems? Because now you're the conduit.
You're the connect.
Right.
Because trust me, I was thinking, I'm like, I need to remember Sam here in case I have a problem. I've got kids and I need to keep her name in my mind.
I got an ex-boyfriend I need taken care of, Sam.
Are people hitting you up a lot?
Well, it was actually the #1 true crime podcast in the UK. So it was huge in the UK. And what I have found, Dax, is drop things into conversation. I was speaking to someone the other day and they were talking about a business deal that had really gone wrong, and they were like, well, you know, if I don't get my money back, you can get hold of KC for me. And I'm like, ha 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 ha. I am on speed dial for several people now, you're right. But, you know, he said to me, Sam, you ever need me, you just call me, I'll be there. So
don't call him, Sam. Don't call him.
So far,
I
you know,
love it.
I've got a teenager who won't clean her room. That's luckily the extent of my
Casey
problems
shows
right
up,
now.
Maui shows up at the door. Not the Maui you want to see at the door.
Not the Maui you want at the door. Now, Sam, this is a podcast discovery show. What are some podcasts that you're listening to right now that you can put our listeners onto?
Oh my gosh. Well, you know, I spend my whole life making podcasts and presenting podcasts. And so I sometimes think, you know, I don't have time to listen to a whole bunch of podcasts, but I definitely have some go-tos. I mean, I make another podcast called Sam Walker's Desert Diaries, which is what it's like for a woman in her 40s to quit her job at the BBC, leave her nice suburban Victorian terrace in rainy England, and move to the desert and the Wild West. Spoiler alert, scorpions and, you know, crazed gun-wielding landlords. It is the Wild West. So, you know.
Well, former gun-wielding landlords now 6 feet under in this desert.
They're alive. They're alive.
But, you know, I loved The Dropout. I'm sure so many people have mentioned that.
That was a good one.
Know, just listening to, you know, Elizabeth Holmes, the whole trial with Theranos was just mind-blowing, and that was I looked forward to getting my kids from school every day because I was like, I'm going to catch up. So that was great. Two that I really love. One is really different, actually. It's called How Did We Get Here? And it's a podcast with Professor Tanya Byram, who's a clinical psychologist, and a quite famous UK TV presenter called Claudia Winkleman. They're very close friends in real life. Professor Tanya Byram is an incredible therapist, psychologist, and it's people who come to them, and it's kind of about an hour long, and it's a real deep dive into why we have the relationships we do. So perhaps someone will come who hasn't spoken to their parents for 10 years, has fallen out with their brother, their marriage is falling apart, they can't connect with their child. I mean, so many different types of relationships. And then you basically hear a therapy session, and it is fascinating, and you engage with these people instantly. And even if you don't have a sibling that you haven't talked to for 10 years, just hearing about how we can speak to each other and communicate better as humans, I love that podcast.
So
I think
Sam,
it's amazing.
I've got a recommendation for you if you're into the therapy stuff.
Yeah.
Where do we begin with Esther Perel?
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of it?
I have heard of it.
It is so good. It's people, you know, you are the fly in the wall in that therapy session, and it's people who are having problems in their marriage, there's cheating, there's, you know, I want to try different things. I mean, you're listening to it all, and she's giving them advice. It is such a good podcast. So if you're into therapy, check out Where Should We Begin with Esther Perel.
I love it. I will do that. And the second one I really wanted to recommend is a British comedian and writer called Adam Buxton. And I mean, again, he was kind of my generation. He was a real kind of into indie music. He had this kind of irreverent comedy show in the 90s and noughties. And he makes this podcast now, and he essentially goes for a walk with his dog around the countryside of England, kind of riffs, and then speaks to somebody. And you might think, another interview podcast. And it kind of is, but he's so creative, and he's got that really silly British sense of humor. And do you know what? Sometimes in Arizona, if things get a bit heavy, like crazed landlords, it makes me feel kind of closer to home in a strange way. But he talks to a bunch of other comedians like Kay Van Novak and Natasha Demetriou, you know, who are What We Do in the Shadows. He's, you know, from that show. But he speaks to kind of storytellers like David Sedaris and Isabel Allende. So people I kind of wouldn't think, I must listen to an interview with them. The way he talks to people in a really open way, I just adore. And he did Paul McCartney, and I'm the world's biggest Beatles nut, so that I've listened to that episode 45 times.
What was the name of that podcast again? One more time?
So it's called the Adam Buxton Podcast, and there are silly jingles and childish songs and things you might think, what the heck was that about? But at the heart of it is these really honest conversations. And I've cried with laughter on several times because they've been so stupid. He's really childish, and I love it. But he's super smart. So it kind of ticks all the boxes for me. So I love that.
I love it. Well, Sam, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
And guys, if you have not checked out American Vigilante, head on over to podsauce.com. We have a link there directly to her podcast. It is so good.
Yeah.
Mostly because you're fighting yourself to decide whether or not it's real or not.
But I want you guys to listen to episode 5, so we're going to put that. You can listen
Well, no, you should listen to them in a row.
Well, the beautiful thing about Sam's podcast is that you can listen to them in any order. I mean, there's small elements that do link chronologically.
How about this? Listen to the first one so she gets into the story, and then whatever.
Yeah, because at least that way you guys can find out about the shady landlord that we're talking about. But I'm going to also make sure we put up episode 5 because it was an episode that I really, really enjoyed, and I feel you guys will as well.
Awesome.
Sam, thank you so much for joining us.
Lovely to meet you. Take care.
Lovely. I love that. I'm going to say that. So lovely to meet you. Guys, don't go anywhere. We have more. This is Podsauce.